Hello everyone and welcome. There may be times in an off-grid or get-home type situation where you may not have access to a firearm and you may not be proficient with a bow. So today I'm going to show you how to make a crossbow out of scavenged parts. So let's go in the shop and get started. The materials that I'm going to use to build this scavenged crossbow are some 1x material, a piece of hardwood, some paracord, and a fiberglass rod. So the first thing I'm going to do is see which end is the straightest. Then I'm going to hold this like a rifle, and this will give me my length and about where I want to put my hands. I made a mark at about 36 inches to see if this is going to be a comfortable fit when I hold it. And I believe 36 will be just about right. Next, I made a mark on my fiberglass rod at about 36 inches. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to work at 36 inches because it's very hard to bend at that length. So we'll have to give it a test and see. I've decided I'm going to come about 2 inches over from the end. And then about 1 inch down. And the reason why I went with these dimensions is because I want my stock on this end to be about 2 inches wide. This mark right here is where my hand was when I was holding this like a rifle. And I'm probably going to come down to about 3 inches right here just to make sure that my hand has clearance for the bow itself. Then I'm just going to take it and kind of blend them together. And this is the mark where my second hand was. And I'm just going to try to do the same that way. And I'm going to try to mount my trigger mechanism somewhere in this area. So I need it to be a little bit thinner. So my stock is going to kind of look like this. And this may change. I don't have a pattern for this or anything like that. I'm just kind of doing it as I go along. So getting started on it anyway. I've got my prod or bow kind of loosely mounted in here. And the reason why I've got this done first is because I'm going to design my stock on how far I can pull this back. Now I'm just going to take and tiller my prod or bow, whichever one you want to call it, to see where I need to make my cut for my lock. After tillering the prod or bow, this mark right here is the one I'm going to use for my lock when I go to cock the bow. And I'm going to go about 1/2 inch deep. Then I'm going to go about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to make another cut right here. Then I just took and removed the wood that was in between them. With that part done, I can go ahead and make my trigger. And I want to make my trigger first so I can figure out where I want to mount it on the stock itself. I got my 2 triggers rough cut, and all I got to do is finish shaping them. And when doing a 2 trigger system like this, you have to make sure that you shape your triggers together. I've got my triggers final shaped, and I'm ready to drill my pivot hole. I'm going to mount my triggers about 1/2 inch past the notch and at an angle so that when I mash it with my thumb, this end will come up. This is how it's going to work once I get my triggers glued to the dowel. Now that I have all my moving components laid out, it's time to shape the stock. I've got my stock final shaped and I added a coat of stain to it, and now I'm ready to assemble the crossbow itself. Here is my final assembly of my crossbow. In my original design, I had my triggers mounted up higher, and I found that this lead edge came up way too high past the rail. So I took and re-drilled them and moved them down, and I added a stop in here so that the point of my trigger would be even with my rail. And I added just a piece of Kydex to help hold my bolt in. For my test bolt, I just kind of whipped something together out of a piece of bamboo and a field tip. So now I'm going to go out here and test them out and see how it does. that went completely over the fence. Like I said, it's probably 15 feet past the fence. Went in a pretty good distance. That tree back there is where I was shooting from. I made me a couple of bolts or arrows out of some bamboo, some feathers, and field tips, and that's what I'm going to use to see if I can hit a target with. My first test is going to be at about 10 yards. So here's my test at 10 yards. Arrow went in about that far. This is my test at 20 yards. All right, so this is shot number 2. Well, I got a better grouping on that one. So that's how far it went in the center. That's 20 yards. And again that far. So it's about 6 inches deep at 20 yards. So I'll take that. Getting a distance of 60 plus yards and 6-inch penetration on my arrows at 20 yards, I'm going to call this a successful build. Now, when doing something like this, there were a couple of problems that I run into. For one, the stock that I made out of some pine 1x, and the poundage that I had on my prod kept making the paracord dig into the top of the bow and creating a groove. And I almost had to set it to the point where it would slip off. So if you're going to build something like this, you might want to use hardwood instead. And another thing is the piece that I used to hold my arrow onto the bow, I started off with a piece of Kydex and it didn't work out that great, so I upgraded to just a piece of sheet metal banding, and that seemed to do the trick. And it also seemed to help the string when it would come off of the lock itself and hit the arrow from deflecting up. Another thing is it's a 2-trigger system, and even though the 2 triggers are locked together, if you use one of them, it has a tendency to make the arrow shoot the opposite direction, so you have to use both of them, and holding it on your shoulder and trying to do that at the same time is a little bit funky if you're used to holding a gun. But other than that, this was a great build, and it performed well beyond my expectations. I wasn't expecting to get 60 yards, the total distance out of it. I figured 30 would be tops, and for it to get that kind of penetration out of my arrows was another kind of surprise to me. So anyway, thank y'all for watching. We'll see y'all next time.